Welcome in, everybody. Welcome to the Marshall Experience. Tonight we are covering the lovely NFC East and just the absolute fantasy outlook for each team. We're going to cover basically a question that surrounds each position. Okay, we're gonna go over like what's their fantasy floor. Then we're going to go into their outlook and see what we predict. It's going to be a fun one, guys. Before we get into anything, obviously we want to thank who we're powered by, and that's in the background there, the Sports Lounge Media. Big things happening over here, and again, I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. If you're not a part of the journey, you're going to want to be. But again, big things happening over here at Sports Lounge Media. You can catch them on Wednesdays on YouTube about 6:30, 7 o'clock Central. So again, our sponsorships as well, the Mogul brand and the Diamond Collection. We are waiting on our product, and hopefully it'll be here by next Tuesday, so that way we can start getting that introduced. But again, guys, so tonight it's going to be a lengthy one, so bear with me and hang in there. But again, we're covering the entirety of the NFC East. Starting this week, we're going to start going division by division. And we're going to basically do a fantasy outlook for the entirety of the team. Okay. And that goes from quarterback, running back, wide receivers, tight end, defense as well, because some leagues do have defenses, right? So again, bear with me. This is going to be a lengthy one, probably about an hour, hour and a half. Might get a little sweaty in here, but we'll be all right. But again, just for the people that just got in, we are covering the NFC East only tonight. We are going to go division by division, so that way we don't, just bore everybody with all the information, right? So we're going to get right into it, and we're going to start off with them, Super Bowl champions, right? So life is pretty good for the, reigning Super Bowl champs at the moment, right? Sure, they had the league's reigning third-ranked defense in EPA allowed per play. I think they obviously have to replace a handful of key contributors who left in free agency, but most key parties remained from the squad, okay, that posted the NFL's second best point differential at plus 160 during the regular season last year. Now that bodes out to be the offense and the defense, right? That point differential is your offense scoring so many points and your defense only allowing a certain amount, right? Of course, that was then, and this is now. So today we're going to break down, some of the biggest, most fantasy-related questions facing the Birds ahead of 2025. Okay. First, we're going to get right into it. Does Jalen Hurts have the safest floor of any fantasy quarterback? Okay. All Hurts has done since taking over as Philly starter in 2021 is work as one of the league's single most productive players at the position. Okay. Hurts' fantasy points per game by season since 2021. He's been quarterback 6, quarterback 1, quarterback 2 in 2023, and last year quarterback 5. Okay. Now, of course, the rushing prowess, aka the tush push, right, is a big reason why. Hurts has scored double-digit touchdowns on the ground in each of the past 4 seasons. Cam Newton and Josh Allen, who have had 3 and 2 respectively, are the only other quarterbacks with multiple qualifying campaigns in NFL history. Okay, we're truly looking at a fantasy football cheat code here, guys. It is what it is. Turning 27 in August, there's really no reason to expect a physical decline from the reigning Super Bowl MVP anytime soon. Okay, while it might be a lot cooler if Hurts could get back to, 2022 heights, which was 250 passing yards per game, as opposed to 194 per game through the air in 2024. Any added explosiveness with his arm would simply be the cherry on the top of an already delicious fantasy Sunday, right? It just kind of pushes it over the edge there. Again, double-digit rushing touchdowns, guys. Those points add up. After all, Hurts joined Anthony Richardson and Justin Fields as the only quarterbacks with north of 40% of their fantasy production coming on the ground last season. Okay, so this is kind of where we see Jalen Hurts going in the 2025 season. So this is the outlook for Jalen Hurts. You don't need more than one hand to count the number of quarterbacks that you'd rather have in fantasy this year, right? Although the relative lack of passing ceiling in the Eagles' perennial run-first offense, we'll see how it does under Kevin Patullo. But I think it keeps Hurts, as of right now, until I see more passing game, it keeps him behind guys like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. It does. Fantasy-wise, it does. Okay? Going off of last season, the 194 yards per game just isn't pretty. Okay? It's not pretty when it comes to fantasy numbers. But when you're rushing for 2 to 3 touchdowns possibly in a game, or 2 to 3 rushing touchdowns over a slew of weeks even as a quarterback would be very productive. Okay? We're going to move on to Saquon Barkley and how Saquon could possibly be a bust in 2025 this season. Okay? From massive house calls to ridiculous jukes. And of course, hurdling finely tuned athletic machines backwards, right? There's no getting around Barkley's status as the game's best running back after his incredible 2,000-yard campaign in 2024, right? Overall, his 125 rushing yards per game were a whopping 43.3 more than his previous career mark. Now, we knew that him going from the Giants to the Eagles was that next step, right? But did I tell you that he was going to average 40 more yards per game? That's quite a stat. The 28-year-old really just signed a 2-year, $41 million extension this offseason, making him the highest paid running back in NFL history. Now, you throw in the reality that PFF's top-ranked offensive line returns 4 out of the 5 starters, right? It's tough to poke really any hole in the profile of the arguably first overall pick of fantasy, right? Now, that said, there are 2 itty-bitty problems that could perhaps make Barkley look a bit more human in 2025. One of those is receiving volume, okay? Barkley averaged a career low 4.6 points per game as a pass catcher last season, which isn't a huge surprise considering the Eagles ranked 30th in total targets in the running back room as long as Hurts has been there in the 4 years. So Hurts is not a check down guy. Let's get that straight right now. He ranks 30th in the running back targets. Okay, keep that thought. Still, Barkley joined Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor as the most rushing dependent running backs at the top of the position fantasy landscape last season. Okay, so again, where does his receiving volume come into play here? Now that we have A.J. Dillon, Will Shipley on a year 2, what does that look like for Barkley? Okay, now also a big one, and this transpired last year and ate into a lot of his stats, was the goal line work. Okay, Hurts racked up the league's 3rd most rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line last season. 18. Barkley wasn't too far behind at 13. He was ranked 11th. But only 4 of those 13 were converted into touchdowns because Philly, isn't too fond of giving their running backs the rock on the 1-yard line, right? We all know what comes next. This resulted in Barkley getting all the way to the 1-yard line, only not to score a touchdown on the league high 9 occasions. 9. Okay. Now, you consider Eagle running backs are tied for last in carries from the 1-yard line at 13 since 2021. Imagine that. That's when Jalen Hurts got drafted. But easily first in rush attempts between the 2 and the 5-yard line at 78. So once they get down there, guys, that's it. That's what we do. Hey, these concerns were more valid, I think, than ever entering last season and didn't stop Barkley from finishing as the running back 1 in fantasy land, right? I think we had the same concerns last year. I think just realized that the ceiling would somehow be even higher in a sort of different scheme. I think if we up the passing game, Barkley is a very capable back out of the backfield in the receiving game. Okay, now if we do open up that pass game, it also opens up the play action. It also opens up holes for Barkley because now they have two facets of the game to play against. Okay, not just load the box against Barkley, right? So we're going to look at Barkley's fantasy football outlook for 2025. Okay, the likelihood that Barkley, again, combines around 400 combined carries and targets as of last year, it's up in the air if it's going to be that same production, right? I find the curse of 370, which we've already talked about, sort of studies the reference that running backs falling off after a year featuring a heavy workload, right? The data pool itself is a very small sample that usually ignores playoff touches and receiving work. Okay, the only reason why Saquon shouldn't be the running back one in fantasy football drafts of all shapes and sizes is the reality that Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs arguably project for similar volume, but are much younger. Okay, we have to realize that in these dynasty leagues, guys, that your guys are setting up, you're going to have this team year after year after year. You're going to want to draft the younger guys so that way you can keep the young talent, right? Okay, what we're going to get into now is the chances. What are the chances that A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith return to high-end fantasy value, right? So we talked about that passing game. That passing game's got to ramp up. Okay, nobody is debating the reality that Brown and Smith are absolute ballers, right? Shot callers. Just look at the company they kept last season in terms of the league's most efficient wide receivers at picking up yards and earning targets on a per route basis, okay? Anyway, everyone agrees Brown, who's 27, and Smith, 26, crazy to me that they're almost the same age, are quite good at their jobs, right? According to PFF, they finished at wide receiver 12 and wide receiver 15 in points per game last year. Now, that's respectable. This was not the first time both managed to simultaneously put together quality seasons, obviously, although it was Smith's best per game finish since teaming up with A.J. Brown back in 2022, which is when they went to the Super Bowl, okay? Now, Brown has finished in the top 12 for the 3 years that he's been in Philadelphia. Wide receiver 8, and then wide receiver 12 last year. Okay, Smith has had a little bit rougher road. His first year with AJ, he finished wide receiver 14. 2023 kind of had an off year, wide receiver 20, and then this last year went back up to, again, like we said, wide receiver 15. Wide receiver 1 production is expected from Brown at this point, right? But it's curious that Smith is just stuck outside the position's top 24 receivers in early average draft position, despite returning top 20 numbers in each of the past 3 seasons, like we just talked about, right? It'd be a lot cooler for either wide receiver to individually be the clear-cut featured number 1 pass game option. Just realize last season, A.J. Brown and Smith's combined 58% target share, ranked second among teammate duos, and their 80% of combined air yard share was tied for first, okay? So when Hurts is basically passing that ball, 80% of the time, he's either going to AJ or Devontae. That is what that means, okay? So what do we think the fantasy outlook for A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith will be for 2025? Don't get bored making a profit, okay? A.J. Brown and Smith might not have the sort of gaudy 180-plus target ceilings that, talents of their caliber deserve. But the Eagles' run-first offense has to at least have condensed its passing game almost solely around them, right? Continue to treat Brown as the borderline wide receiver 1, okay? He should be a top 5 wide receiver taken off the board. He's been done this throughout his entire career, guys. While Smith continues to deserve that low-end wide receiver 2 treatment, okay? Next position is Dallas Goedert, poised to finally put together a boom year, okay? Now, there was a lot of smoke to the fire that Goddard could be traded prior to the draft. But here we are in May, and the 30-year-old veteran remains a member of the Birds after renegotiating his contract. Still, though, Goddard doesn't exactly project as someone for fantasy managers to get overly excited about. Injuries have caused the 7-year veteran to miss 15 games over the last 3 seasons. Okay? And even his per-game fantasy numbers really haven't exactly been anything to call home about. Now, Goddard will go from borderline he will go from borderline tight end 1 territory to an arguably top 6 option at the position should either A.J. Brown or Smith miss time, right? Because that changes the landscape of the game. But the increase in age and the 2-year sample of good, not great production makes it tough to expect too much from him in 2025. Okay, so the expectations shouldn't be through the roof, guys. Again, we just said 80% of the balls that Jalen Hurts is throwing is either going to A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. Now, what do we see Dallas Goedert's outlook for 2025? Okay, I'm perfectly fine deploying a first or last strategy at tight end this season, thanks to the reality that guys like, Dallas Goedert, Jake Ferguson are currently ADP tight end 15 and tight end 17. But I struggle to see a true boom outcome for the Eagles, tight end without an injury occurring to one of the team's wide receivers. That's what this boils down to. Again, guys, we said that we would cover defense because most of these leagues have the defense, right? The defense and special teams. Okay, so is this the NFL's best defense? I reckon Havoc. Havoc is a cool stat that is, defined as the percentage of plays where the defense got a pressure, tackle for a loss, an interception, a forced fumble, or a pass breakup. Basically anything that causes havoc, okay? The top 5 defenses in this metric last season were as follows. Broncos 1, Lions 2, Browns at 3. That was interesting when I read this. Eagles at 4, and the Vikings at 5. The one that surprised me there was the Browns. But not too shabby, although it remains to be seen if losing the front 7 difference makers like Brandon Graham, Josh Swelton, Milton Williams will be proved to be too much of an overcome. Okay, I do like Moro Ajomo. I do like Jalix Hunt. I like the guy they just drafted in Ty Robinson. Okay, I think the defensive line is just getting younger, and I think we just don't have that veteran presence anymore, and that'll be fine. We'll be fine. We have plenty of other veterans around the team. Okay, so what is the fantasy outlook of that? Being a top 4 defense scoring last year. Okay, so the fantasy's reigning 7th best defense has some work to do in order to replicate their typical dominance at the line of scrimmage, right? But I wouldn't count out defensive coordinator Vic Fangio. He's still figuring things out to a fairly high level, especially with all 5 of Philly's top draft picks going to the defensive side of the ball. Okay, Vic wanted some new toys. Jalen Carter's young. Nolan Smith is young. Got Nakobe Dean coming back from injury. We got Jahai Campbell. Okay, Vic wanted some new toys, so we'll see what he does with it. Okay, so what is our Philadelphia Eagles prediction for 2025? Okay, this again, and I say again, sure looks like a lot of one of the most complete teams in football. Let's be honest. Okay, it's I put the Eagles joining the Bills, the Ravens, and I think that's it as the only teams to have an 11.5 over win total ahead of next season. Okay, I don't think there's going to be a lot of 13-win teams next year, guys. I think this is going to even out. Teams are gearing up. Okay, but you give me a over on the 11.5 wins for a team that has averaged 13 wins per season since 2022, since going back to that Super Bowl. My bold fantasy prediction is that Smith Devontae Smith will outscore A.J. Brown for the first time in fantasy football. You heard it here first. Next team we're going to talk about in the NFC East is the Washington Commanders, that little bro. The Commanders overachieved, right? Overachieved in a major way during year one with Jane Daniels and the Dan Quinn partnership. They made it all the way to the NFC Championship before the clock struck midnight on their fairy tale story. While that 55-23 loss exposed a Washington defense that was more meh than good throughout the season, there's still little doubt that Daniels had this offense absolutely humming during his rookie campaign, okay? Suddenly, expectations are much higher for them in 2025 now that they've found their guy, right? More weapons have been added to the offense. If you want to call Deebo Samuel a weapon, that is your call. I'm more talking about the Larry Tunsil. I'm more talking about the key pieces that they focused on protecting Jaden Daniels around, right? The ceiling might as well be the roof for this squad if Daniels manages to take anything close to a year two leap, okay? We always expect, right? We always expect the sophomore slump, right? I'm not so sure that I expect that with Jaden Daniels. But, at the same time, I didn't expect that with C.J. Stroud either. So it'll be interesting to see how this sophomore season really pans out for Jaden Daniels. But what is stopping Jaden Daniels from being the quarterback one of fantasy this year, right? The 2024 NFL Draft second overall pick is fresh off, turning in one of the position's most productive rookie seasons, ever. Okay? The most fantasy points per game from a rookie quarterback in NFL history at a minimum of 8 starts. At number 1, we have Cam Newton at 23 points per game. Justin Herbert as a rookie, 22.2. Robert Griffin, 21.2. And then we have Jaden Daniels, who's just below Robert Griffin at a 20.9. Okay? Yes, Daniels' lethal ability on the ground was a big reason for this, right? His almost 900 rushing yards and 6 scores resulted in a whopping almost 8 fantasy points per game from just strictly rushing production. Okay, a mark which tied Josh Allen and only trailed Anthony Richardson at 7.8 and the king, Jalen Hurts, at 9.8. Okay, 9.8 fantasy points per game just by the ground by your boy. Okay. Also, yes, it was the rising second-year talent's already polished passing ability that should really have fans and fantasy members, our managers alike, excited ahead of next season, right? Daniels posted the same EPA per dropback, okay, points per play, as Joe Burrow, okay? It's quite impressive, guys. Quite impressive. Ultimately, the only players to finish as the fantasy's overall quarterback one since 2018, I apologize, are Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. That's it. Daniel's ability to join this group is contingent on his rushing floor remaining sky high and experiencing a spike in production through the air, something that is certainly possible after posting relatively beatable marks in the passing touchdown rate, right? Yards per attempt was 7.4. It ranked 13th last season, okay? Again, sophomore season, we're trying to get that jump. Can he make it? What is Jaden Daniels' fantasy football outlook for 2025, okay? It's tough to rationally rank Daniels ahead of, either Jackson or Allen or Hurts due to their demonstrated superior passing upside, okay? I would say more Josh and Lamar, but I think that Jalen Hurts can take that next step. But I think that the potential for the Commanders quarterback of the present and the future to take a step forward in that department has him at least earned a top 4 quarterback status. Okay? Now, if Jalen Hurts cannot figure out the passing game, and they remain a run-first offense, we could see Jaden Daniels take that heat into the quarterback 3. Okay? Jalen Hurts is just not going to be able to keep up. Those passing yards, those passing touchdowns, they got to come from somewhere. Jalen Hurts has to make that next step. Is Brian Robinson a late-round quarterback drafter's delight? Okay, we didn't talk about this guy on Tuesday, but the Commanders were, I think, in my opinion, a popular dark horse player in the running back market during free agency and the draft this offseason. Yet, the only somewhat meaningful addition that wound up making was adding New Mexico-Arizona product Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in the 7th round. Okay, this means to me that Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler are once again poised to lead an offense that racked up the league's fifth most total rushing yards last season. Now, part of that was simply the Commanders' ability to play with plenty of leads. Their drop back over expectation rate, was actually above average. Okay? That could certainly be a reality again in 2025 should Daniels and company manage to build on their success in the run game. Now, for the tricky part, discerning what exactly the rotation could look like for Brian Robinson 2025. We unfortunately don't have the best sample size for this, as the former back missed 3 games last year and was limited in others while dealing with the knee, hamstring, and ankle injuries. And he had to sit out 5 full games stemming from 2 concussions as well. Okay. Robinson is the Thunder, in my opinion, who has the chance to flirt with 15-plus carries when the Commanders can build a lead. Eckler is the Lightning, who should see more action when Washington is forced in a trailing game script, right? Note that B-Rob easily led the way in carries inside the 5-yard line on the season for the Washington Commanders, not as an NFL whole. I guess I should clarify that. Although the presence of Daniels didn't help matters either, who also ran for 10 of those. Okay, so Rob ran for 11. Daniels ran for 10. It's kind of a Hurts Saquon situation, but Brian's getting that inside the 5 rushing attack. This variable is the primary issue with being overly excited about either running back ahead of 2025. Okay, obviously Daniels is a baller, but high volume dual threat quarterbacks historically haven't been great for the fantasy success of their running backs due to, 2 reasons. Scrambling more often than they check down, and factoring into the rushing equation near the goal line, right? The real path to success for either Robinson or Eckler comes down to one of them taking over the backfield via injury. While Washington did annoyingly insist on keeping guys like Jeremy McNichols and Chris Rodriguez involved when either of their top 2 backs missed time, right? Especially Jeremy Nichols. Both Robinson and Eckler did post multiple games with a snap count north of 70%. That sort of near every down roll could go a long way in the fantasy land upside. An offense that really most expect to be a top 10 scoring unit, right? Jaden Daniels, you got a good running back room. Eckler's getting up there in age, but I believe in Brian Robinson. You got Terry McLaurin, Zach Ertz coming back, Debo. Again, if we want to call Debo a weapon, we can do that, but I'm not a believer. Are Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler fantasy targets in 2025? Okay. Robinson and Eckler profile as poor man's versions of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. A wish version, a T-move version, if you will. An evenly split backfield between running backs used differently, but we don't feel good about the overall offense and have to deal with, a far more mobile quarterback, right? That said, both Commanders running backs have unappreciated handcuff upside if the other goes down, as mentioned before. Making each other more than a solid mid to late round investment on rosters that largely fade the position in the early rounds. Okay. Now we're going to get into the wide receivers. Are Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel capable of putting up big-time fantasy numbers? Okay. Expecting McLaurin to put up big-time numbers shouldn't be a hot take after the 29-year-old veteran posted a career best wide receiver 14 finish per game last season. Okay, the high-end consistency was truly something to marvel. McLaurin's 11 top 18 finishes surpassed even Justin Jefferson at 10 and Ja'Marr Chase at 10 for the position's best mark. Consistency, guys. We go back to that consistency. Now, the artist known as Scary Terry to most has previously posted wide receiver 29, 20, 30, 23, and 36 finishes, prior. 2024 was admittedly an outlier of sorts, right? Although the reality that it came alongside McLaurin finally experiencing above average quarterback play, right? It lends the idea that the high-end production wasn't a fluke, okay? I have a little bit tougher time simply writing off Samuel's down campaign as variance. The 2020 version of Samuel simply wasn't on par with what fans are used to seeing, right? Brutal efficiency numbers as both a rusher and a receiver resulted in the least productive season of his career, okay? Of course, some context could help explain why Samuel had struggled so much in 2024. Maybe Father Time has simply came for the typically electric hybrid wide receiver running back, or maybe that calf strain, kind of lingered in September. He also suffered a rib injury during Week 8 against the Cowboys. It was right after he ended up in the hospital with pneumonia, I also believe. I'm not a doctor, but dealing with calf and rib injuries on top of an illness bad enough to require multiple nights spent in a hospital doesn't exactly seem ideal for any person, okay? Samuel averaged 77 total yards per game during his first 5 games of the season before the latter rib and illness issues, compared to just 46 yards per game in his final 9 contests. Okay, his efficiency on target fell down along with his per reception basis. Okay. Overall, Samuel averaged 14 points per game in weeks 1 through 6 last season, and then after the issues compared to 9.4. So he dropped a whole 5 points, guys. He was a wide receiver 54. So I have to see improvement. Again, small sample size, sure. But then again, the latter disappointing stretch also doesn't exactly supersede, the previous 5 years of excellence from the longtime baller. To summarize, Deebo wasn't very good in 2024. Again, I have to see it. After largely doing nothing with the ball, but his early season performance does suggest that perhaps illness and the rib injuries played a bigger role than what we realized, okay? So what is the fantasy outlook for all of the wide receivers and the Commanders? It might be tough for McLaurin to match last season's amazing 13 touchdowns, but he still profiles as the clear-cut number 1 target for one of the league's best young quarterbacks. Let's be honest about it. That alone makes him worthy of a mid-tier wide receiver 2 treatment. Now, while Samuel is more of a borderline wide receiver 3, who fantasy managers are really hoping can hop back on that horse like it's 2023 again. That said, Deebo is just 29 years old, guys, and projects the triple-digit combined carries and targets. There's some 2024 pre-injury Chris Godwin potential here. Should be motivated playmaker managing to rekindle his previous form. So it'd be interesting to see what Deebo Samuel can cook up this year. Will Zach Ertz keep getting away with it? It's a question. Ben Sinnott truthers were forced to watch, really the second rounder catch just 5 passes all season long. Last year, they drafted another tight end. Failing to beat out John Bates on the depth chart, let alone old man Zach Ertz. The 34-year-old veteran is fresh off posting his best numbers since 2021. As he caught 66 passes and 7 touchdowns. It was good enough for tight end 10 status and PPR points per game. Ertz season ending 11 catches on 104 yards, revenge game in the NFC Championship. It made it seem like he had a little bit more gas in the tank. Okay, even more wild was the reality that Ertz actively functioned as Jaden Daniels' number 2 pass game option through the season. Obviously, Scary Terry, which had 117 targets, easily led the way, but Ertz at 91 finished far ahead of Zacchaeus at 64 and Noah Brown at 56. Say what you will about Zach Ertz after the catchability. He did hurdle a man, just saying. But he's consistently managed to demand targets, at a high level, even in his later years. Just look at 2023 with the Cardinals, when Ertz managed to post a 23% target per route run, which was ranked 6th in the league, before getting injured and really allowing the way for Trey McBride to come in, right? Now, is Zach Ertz a late-round tight end sleeper? Being 35 next November, Ertz's best football is, certainly in the rearview mirror, right? Just realize that he's still good enough to outslow plenty of linebackers around the league, and according to capable of being a younger, more exciting tight end, firmly on the bench, Ben Sinnott. Okay, don't be surprised to see him on the cover of a Week 2 waiver wire article after catching 7 passes and a touchdown in Week 1. Just saying. How much easier does a dual threat quarterback make life for a team's run blocking? Okay. Offense's willingness to utilize the read option has made dual threat quarterbacks more dangerous than ever. Think about a fast quarterback like a deadly 3-point shooter in basketball. Defenses need to be aware of where they are all at all moments, right? Their sheer threat of doing something cool accordingly pulls defenders out of the position. To try and measure this, I went ahead and looked at every team's running back yards before contact, okay? I just used career rushing yards per game to get 40 qualified seasons, and the results were as follows. Okay? The average rank in team running back yards per contact, per carry, in our baller dual threat quarterback is 11.4. The median is about 9.5. So 28 out of the 40 qualified seasons, which is 70%, put forward an above average rank. So what's the bottom line here? Well, the bottom line is last year's Commanders ranked 10th. So don't be surprised if Robinson and Eckler again have plenty of space to run. They also have to worry about Daniels taking off, guys. Okay? It just is. Now, what is the Washington Commanders' prediction for 2025? Okay? The expectations for the Commanders are, suddenly quite high, and have reflected their 9.5 win total ahead of 2025. I think this is the second highest mark in the NFC East, only behind the Eagles at 11.5. So based on Daniels' ascension and overall roster improvements, I'm taking the over on 9.5. My bold fantasy specific take is that Robinson will score 12 plus total touchdowns on his way to a top 20 finish in points per game. I think Brian Robinson is a guy to draft this year. Okay. Next team we're going to talk about is the New York Giants. We'll save those Cowgirls for last. That's where they belong. 2024 was supposed to be a step back in the right direction for the New York Football Giants. After 2023 ended with a disappointing, injury-riddled 6-11 campaign, right? Following the first playoff win since 2011. Instead, yikes. Okay, let's get into it. So, can the 36-year-old Russell Wilson still be a factor in fantasy? Now, it's not like Russ got back to partying like it's 2015 again with the Steelers, but it was at least a step back in the right direction. However, the one thing that hasn't gone out of style just yet is Wilson's patented moonball. If you haven't watched it, literally look it up on YouTube. This man's got the prettiest floater I've ever seen in NFL history. Okay, he gave the term moonball because it's so pretty. Overall, nobody has had a higher passer rating at 126.3 or averaged more yards per attempt at 16 on passes thrown at least 20 yards downfield last year. Again, that floater is a beautiful thing. Turning 37 next November, it's far more likely that not that Wilson has already played his best football, but still it'll still be difficult to name more 20 to 25 better players at this position. At a minimum, the artist known as, well, Let's Ride or Dangerous, whatever you want to call him, should be able to provide enough adequate play to keep, I think, Winston and first-round Jackson Dart on the bench for however long the head coach desires, right? I think he's the starter week 1. Of course, a move to Dart would be best in fantasy land, considering the Ole Miss product's rather awesome dual threat ability, right? Which is kind of why the New York Giants drafted him. While NFL defenses will certainly make life more difficult for a quarterback without, Jalen Monroe-esque athleticism, but Dart deserves a lot of credit for averaging almost 500 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground during his 3 seasons with the Rebels. Okay, and that's including yardage from sacks, guys. That 499 yards is including sack yardage. Dart is a mobile quarterback. Okay, so what is the fantasy outlook for Russell Wilson in 2025? The bar is certainly low, but Russ has the potential to supply the best quarterback play that New York has seen, in a minute. This seems unlikely to provide many fireworks in the fantasy land, considering Wilson's lack of rushing upside at the point of his career, right? But he should at least give this offense a chance to rank better than 30th in scoring as of last year. They've also ranked 30th in scoring out of the last 4 of 5 years, guys. The Giants' offense has not been good for a very, very long time. In football terms, 5 years is a long time. Let's get that straight. So here's the hope and Dart or Winston get a chance to start at some point, but both will be superior fantasy options thanks to their respective rushing and, don't give a shit skill sets. So is really Tyrone Tracy, is he the lead guy? Is this really his backfield? Maybe. It certainly was down the stretch of 2024, right? As Tracy played at least 60% of the offense snaps in each of the team's last 6 games. Of course, things weren't always great, as the former 5th-round pick was seemingly benched on 2 occasions following lost fumbles, something he unfortunately made a habit of all season. Overall, Tracy, 12, which had 12, joined Breece Hall, which had 15, are the only running backs with more than 10 combined fumbles and drops last season. Got to fix those numbers, right? As a wise man once said, ball security is job security. In the football world, that's what it is. And it's accordingly difficult to be certain that Tracy has an overly long leash entering in 2025, particularly after the team used a 4th-round pick on the battering ram Cam Scabado.
Okay. The running back 7 in the rookie supermodel. I think this was Dwayne. I wrote it down. Dwayne McFarland. Okay, Dwayne McFarland. In his rookie running back supermodel, Scatabo he's the 7th ranked, but he does have the sort of theory to be a 3-down running back skill set, right? To run away with this job, if given the opportunity. Now, of course, the incoming rookie also isn't immune to ball security concerns, and this starting job isn't exactly the sort of thing that fantasy dreams are made of. Okay? This is PFF's reigning 23rd ranked offensive line, and the Giants running backs ranked just 26th in receiving yards over the last 3 seasons with Dave Dable. So really, you're just getting rushing stats, right? If they're going to split with Scatabo, I don't see this boding well for either guy. So what is the outlook for Tracy and Scatabo this year? Okay. On one hand, the uncertainty surrounding this pecking order makes it tough to pump any of the involved running backs too high up the ranks. On the other hand, this is reflected in their depressed ADPs, and accordingly makes both Tracy and Scatabo rather awesome 0 running back or late running back drafters. Okay? They have the potential to really boom up the ranks once the clarity emerges and we see a lead guy. That's what drafting a player closer to their floor than their ceiling is all about. Okay? How high is too high to draft Malik Neighbors in fantasy land? It honestly wouldn't be overly surprising if Neighbors, finishes as the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy this year. Let's be honest about it. After all, he's fresh off averaging a whopping 18.2 points per game as a rookie, the 3rd most by a rookie in NFL history, behind only Odell Beckham Jr., which we've talked about Odell Beckham Jr. His rookie year was historical. It has records, guys. At 25, almost 25 points per game as a rookie is bonkers. Randy Moss had 19 points per game as a rookie. Then it's Malik Neighbors. Okay? Neighbors displayed a ridiculous blend of route running, yard after the catch, contested catch ability, and pure, alphaness on his way to becoming just the 7th rookie to average at least 80 yards receiving per game in the Super Bowl era. Okay? Now, Fantasy Life projections have Neighbors earning a league-high 159 targets ahead of next season. I think that's a little much, okay? I do think that Darius Slayton, I do think that Wan'Dale Robinson will kind of eat into that with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson likes to spread the ball around. Okay, the rising second-year talent still might not have the world's best quarterback situation, but it certainly looks improved upon what he had to deal with last year, right? Making him, a first-round pick in non-superflex leagues. Okay? Elsewhere, I grew angry watching every reception that Wan'Dale Robinson hauled in last year, to be honest. It's like every target thrown his way is an attempt to score a touchdown from the 3-yard line. But the problem is that it's actually 3rd and 10 from midfield. Now, we can't ignore somebody fresh off catching 93 of 140 targets, right? The year before with Tommy DeVito and that slew of a quarterback room. Just realize that there have been 270 instances of the wide receiver catching at least 90 passes in a season in NFL history. 2024 Rondell is the only one to average under 50 receiving yards per game with 41. So, guys, my point is these catches are only going for 2 to 3 yards at a time. He doesn't get upfield. Okay? And again, we'll talk about the other guy, Darius Slayton. might be a body catcher, but the man does know how to win deep. It's easy to picture him running underneath some beautiful moon balls from Mr. Wilson, right? Although there's a reason why he averaged just 74 targets during the last 3 seasons. It's tough to see an increased role with Neighbors and Robinson back. Now, still, the Giants gave Slayton a 3-year deal for a reason. And accordingly, he's been a fun late-round dart in best ball drafts while managers don't have to worry about nailing the specific week that he hauls in a bomb. I believe Slayton is one of just 4 wide receivers priced outside of the top 150 overall picks that I would personally think about drafting. Okay, so what is the fantasy outlook for Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson? I wouldn't disagree with anyone who ranks Neighbors as a top 5 wide receiver ahead of 2025, fantasy-wise. He's got all the talent in the world and possesses arguably the highest target ceiling in the league. Meanwhile, I question if Robinson will come close to his previous target market, which we just talked about, with more downfield-oriented quarterbacks under center, making Slayton my preferred secondary option at cost. Because, again, he's that take-the-top-off guy. Wan'Dale's that gadget player, that screen guy. But, again, he doesn't get upfield. And it's proven in the stats. Is Theo Johnson a late-round tight end dart worth throwing in fantasy? Okay. Johnson's rookie campaign was cut short by I can't say it. This was Frank injury. I don't know how to say it. But while the second-year talent has been cleared to run, the injury is certainly concerning for his chances of building on a year one that resulted in only 27 yards per game. Okay, that said, Johnson is a freak athlete. Okay, he helped keep Tyler Warren on the bench during their time at Penn State. Let's just put that out there. Daboll and company thought enough of the 2024 fourth-round pick to play him over 70% of the offensive snaps in 12 of his games last season. Okay, so he's on the field. This came despite Daniel Bellinger and Chris Manhertz being healthy, and the only added competition is, 7th-rounder Thomas Fedone. Now, Fedone has plenty of truthers out there and could perhaps be a late-round gem of sorts. It's not like the Giants used that high of draft capital on Johnson either, but it's also objectively a win for the second-year talent that this was the only meaningful competition added throughout the entire offseason. Okay? So what is the outlook for Theo Johnson? Virtually free in fantasy drafts of all shapes and sizes, guys like Theo, Jawan Johnson, and Okdeko, the guy from Tennessee, are dirt cheap backup options to ideally pair with a more established tight end in fantasy land. McBride, the Bowers, the Kittles, right? It's probably not wise to expect too big of results. Giant tight ends ranked dead last in targets over the past 3 seasons, but virtually free plus athletes with the potential to handle full-time roles aren't exactly easy to find at the position. Okay? So, have the Giants invested more in their defensive line than any team in the league while they're up there? Just 4 teams currently have north of $80 million devoted to their interior defensive line and edge rushers ahead of 2025. In my personal opinion, the Giants may have one of the better defensive lines in the league. Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, just added a dual Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau. I mean, it's bonkers, guys. I think the Giants have done well at the defensive line, okay? Now, these other 4 teams these other 3 teams are the Steelers, the Raiders, the Giants, and the Colts. Those are the 4 teams that are above $80 million in cap space devoted to their defensive line. Now, note that this doesn't even include Abdul Carter yet. While this Giants offense still leaves quite a bit to desire, Don't be surprised if the G-Man will wreak all sorts of havoc at the line of scrimmage on the defensive side of the ball. So what is the outlook for the Giants' defense, special teams, and fantasy? The Giants should have one of the best pass rushers in the league. Carter, Burns, and Lawrence. Those are the headlines. This defense special team has the potential to surprise in fantasy should the offense manage to avoid putting them in too many bad positions. Okay, as long as they're not on the field constantly, we should see production, guys. So what's the prediction for the New York Giants in 2025? Vegas really isn't expecting much from this group. Okay, the Giants joined the Titans, Jets, and Browns as the only teams with a low 5.5 win total. I need to be careful about being too optimistic about every squad, right? But as was the case with the other NFC teams, this win total simply feels too low. I think the NFC East beast is back, guys, especially with this defense. Seeing this squad reach 8 wins would be surprising, but the defensive line looks good enough to win a few games on its own, and I'm going to be honest about that. Russ and Neighbors should provide enough of a spark to hopefully take this offense from, well, horrible just to bad. Just that slight upgrade. But as for my bold fantasy prediction, I will go with Slayton surprising and turning in a borderline wide receiver finish with over 900 yards and 7 scores on the year. I think Darius Slayton is very draftable, guys. Last team we're going to talk about here is the Cowgirls in Dallas. Listen, the Mike McCarthy era is over in Dallas. Okay. After producing a pretty great 49-35 regular season record in Dallas, but unfortunately just a 1-3 mark in the postseason. The promotion of offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer will keep some level of continuity in the franchise, but just realize the times that are changing in the Big D, right? Then again, maybe some changes are warranted after the Cowboys locked like anyone's idea of a bad football team last season. Losing Dak Prescott for the second half of the year certainly didn't help matters, but yikes, right? What is Dak Prescott's fantasy season in the year 2025? Dak turns 32 in July. He's coming off a season-ending hamstring injury. This comes after missing 17 combined games during the 2020-2022 seasons due to thumb, calf, shoulder injuries, in addition to a, brutal dislocated ankle. Unfortunately, the injuries have taken a bit of a toll on Dak Prescott as a rusher over the years, right? But overall, Dak Prescott has averaged 19 rushing yards per game during the first 5 seasons of his career, but just 11.8 since that brutal ankle injury. Okay, this has accordingly led to a bit of more inconsistency in his counting numbers in the last recent seasons, right? So, of course, these later years have also coincided to a drop-off in available weaponry. Just really had CeeDee Lamb. While the team didn't make any upgrades to speak of during free agency, the trade for George Pickens adds an upgrade at wide receiver too, right? Drafting Tyler Booker with the 12th overall pick should help ease the offensive line transition in the post-Zach Martin era. I don't know if it's necessarily going to fix it, but I think it'll ease the transition. It was probably about time for some turnover anyway, right? I mean, Dallas is just not being successful in the postseason. But considering the Cowboys finished in 2024 as the PFF ranked 25th ranked offensive line, something has to change. Because again, that was with Zach Martin. So what is Dak Prescott's fantasy football value for 2025? Look, Dak isn't getting any younger. He'll be anywhere from the league's 5th to the 7th oldest starting quarterback by the time week 1 rolls around. The addition of Pickens certainly helps, but arguably only because the previous bar was so low. Luckily, Prescott isn't being treated as his high-end former self in the fantasy market. He is the early ADP quarterback 16. So that means he's the 16th quarterback drafted. Okay, he's firmly in play as a potential late-round gem at the position in the same tier, guys, as Trevor Lawrence, Drake May, C.J. Stroud, and Tua Tagovailoa. I think Dak Prescott has a better season than Trevor Lawrence and Tua. Okay? This sort of depth is a major reason why I'm a fan of, well, deploying the first elite dual threat options at the top of the draft, right? Are we seriously going to try to make Javonte Williams a thing? Are we? I mean, apparently, right? One of just 10 teams with under $10 million devoted to their backfield in $20-25. The Cowboys were expected to be major players in the draft's running back market, right? Last year, they missed out on Derrick Henry. Saquon came out and said that Dallas never contacted me. So if you've been down this bad in the running back room and you had two greats, not saying Saquon or Derrick Henry would have signed with them, but Derrick Henry had a house in Dallas. I don't see Saquon going to Dallas, but that may be a little biased at this point. But Dallas has made no moves to improve this, okay? Maybe fifth rounder Jadon Blue, wind up being the exception to that rule, and that draft capital is king. But the lack of resources devoted to the group last April reflects the reality that it might be time to take Williams a little bit more seriously as the potential lead back here. To his credit, Williams was electric before his 2022 brutal knee injury. Sadly, it's been a while since we've seen that version of the former second-round pick. Times were particularly tough in 2024 despite running behind the PFF second-ranked offensive line. If he can't do that in Denver, guys, what do we make sure that he's going to do it in Dallas? But still, only 25 years old. Maybe Williams will simply just be a better, healthier version of his former self in a new environment. We know what a change of scenery does for some players, right? Okay. I think we've just seen bounce-back years. Saquon, Derrick Henry when he went from Tennessee to Baltimore. Josh Jacobs went from the Raiders to the Green Bay Packers. Now, do I think that he's on these three guys' level? No. But those are examples of the bounce-back seasons that we've recently seen. A change of scenery does a lot for a player. Okay? Well, then there's Miles Sanders, who's only 28. But he also ranks among, out of 59 players, he ranks 55th in yards per carry over the last two seasons. Williams ranks last in that sample. Okay. The ex-Eagle veteran does have the Panthers' sad excuse, probably, for an offensive environment to blame, although the difference in dollars compared to Javonte indicates the potential expectations at hand. Okay, this brings us to Mr. Blue, who might have a good chance at earning a real day one role as any three-down back. Okay? So what is the value behind the Cowboy running backs in 2025? I'm mostly selling the idea of either Williams or Sanders reinventing themselves in Dallas this season, due to the reality that it's hardly a given that this scoring offense or offensive line takes a major leap back into the league's top 10 units. Again, that offensive line being 26 last year, guys, has to improve. It has to help out this running game. Having George Pickens, having a CeeDee Lamb will help out the running game because now it's just not CeeDee Lamb, right? What is the ceiling for George Pickens in this offense? And with all due respect to CeeDee Lamb, there shouldn't be too much concern about his 2025 production. After all, we're talking about the wide receiver 1 in PPR points per game at 21 over the past 2 seasons. And that's with Cooper Rush starting 8 games, guys, in 2024. So the 26-year-old talent is certifiably good at the game and only deserves to go behind Chase and Justin Jefferson at the position in 2025 drafts. Okay, now there's Pickens, who just turned 24 in March, guys. He's real young, following a relatively underwhelming 2024 campaign that featured him only having 59 receptions into 900 yards and just only 3 touchdowns. While his status as Pittsburgh clear-cut wide receiver 1 often resulted in all sorts of defensive attention, the 3-year veteran usually made on-the-field headlines for the wrong but widely entertaining reasons, right? Still, this shouldn't distract from the fact that Pickens has proven capable of doing some seriously awesome things on the football field. Okay, not to mention he's 6'3", 200 pounds. He plays even bigger than that. Okay. Speaking of splash plays, the Georgia product has averaged 16 yards per reception and almost 10 yards per target since entering the league. Now, this is with Russell Wilson's beautiful moon ball. I think Dak Prescott's got a decent deep ball. So we'll see how that translates. Okay. The fit is also rather great inside this Cowboys offense, in my opinion, considering Lamb is usually deployed from the friendly confines of the slot. Pickens should make himself right at home as the offensive X wide receiver instead of, Jonathan freaking Mingo. Right? I think that's quite an upgrade, guys. Now, Mike Tomlin's track record of keeping knucklehead wide receivers in line before watching them fail for all the wrong reasons elsewhere is certainly troubling. But to Pickens' credit, he's never been in any serious real-life trouble and has played in 48 out of potential 51 games in his career. Only missed 3 games. All in all, the Cowboys profile as a fantastic real-life partner for Pickens as long as all parties involved are able to simply focus on playing ball. I think that it works out quite well in fantasy land. Sure, Russell Wilson's moon balls made for some nice connections last season, but Pickens has otherwise been forced to largely deal with one mediocre quarterback after another in Pittsburgh. Nobody's exactly mistaking Dak for the best quarterback in the world. Let's get that straight. Just realize that he did play at a legitimate MVP level in 2023, a.k.a. the last time he was healthy for a full season. Okay. So, what is CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens' fantasy rankings for 2025? Lamb is my 5th overall ranked player in fantasy, and I'm only drafting the top 2 running backs and wide receivers ahead of him in non-super flex formats. Okay. Meanwhile, it's tough to move Pickens too far up in the ranks due to the presence of a more clear-cut number 1 option. But I've upgraded the now ex-Steeler from wide receiver 38 to wide receiver 31 in my rankings, ahead of guys like a Dunze and Jerry Jeudy. Okay, he should be a solid wide receiver 2 on fantasy teams. Is Jake Ferguson the late round tight end of 2025? The artist known as ASAP Third, that's his nickname. I had to look that up. I didn't know that. Is coming off a relatively disappointing 2024 campaign where he only had 59 catches under 500 yards and did not score the entirety of the season. Now, this is following an impressive 2023 where he had almost 800 yards and 5 scores. Okay, that was after Dalton Schultz left and took his talents to Houston. That was his first full season. So the initial campaign demonstrated some serious upside, right? Ferguson's monstrous 3-touchdown explosion against the Packers in the 2023 playoffs is good for the second highest single game fantasy boom, which was 37 points above expectation during the last 2 seasons. Okay? They call him the Seahawks Slayer. Apparently, he's had great games against the Seahawks in the past. Earned an impressive 102 targets in his last full healthy season with Dak Prescott, the second most on the Cowboys behind Lamb. That latter health point is my best explanation for why the 26-year-old talent struggled to get much going in the box last season. Ferguson suffered a grade 2 MCL sprain in week 1 and was later concussed after coming back in week 11. This means we only had a 6-game sample size of Ferguson actually getting to play with Dak. A stretch in which he ranked 5th most targets among all tight ends. And you guessed it, 2nd most on the Cowboys, period. Dak Prescott loves him some Jake Ferguson. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Ferguson is poised to put up a top 3 season in tight end world, but we are just 12 months removed from him sporting a preseason top 10 tight end in ADP. Prescott has tossed 30-plus touchdowns in each of his last 3 seasons in which he started 16-plus games. So if he's healthy, he's producing. Ferguson's name might as well be the next to touchdown regression in the dictionary after racking up a league-high 86 targets without a score last season. Do I see him getting to that potential in 2023 again? I'm not so sure. So what is the fantasy outlook for Jake Ferguson in 2025? This is exactly the sort of bet late round tight end diehards should be locking to make. Ferguson is my tight end 11. And someone I will happily continue to buy at his present. Tight end 15 ADP. I can guarantee you I can't even name 14 tight ends that will produce more than Jake Ferguson next year. That's a fact of life, guys. Next, we're going to cover the defense of the Cowboys. Did the Cowboys make an effort, an honest effort, to improve their offensive line? Talk about the offensive line first, okay? We're not going to talk about their defense because I think their defense is not good. So last year's starters were as follows, okay? Tyler Guyton, which was 75th best grade among 85 tackles. Tyler Smith at left guard was the 22nd above 122 guards and centers. Not bad. Connor Beebe, their center, was 49th out of that 122, and Zach Martin was actually a 46. Terrence Steele was 45th out of 85. Okay? So now, Guyton and Martin both missed times with injury and should be given some slack for their respective performances. Still, the reality that the future Hall of Famer is being replaced by a first-round rookie doesn't exactly guarantee an immediate upgrade. The Cowboys are basically hoping that improved health and continuity that it will turn this rather bad group into something better. Overall, Dallas was just 31st in yards per contact per carry last season. This is why I wanted to talk about the offensive line versus the defense. The offensive line needs work, guys. Big time. This run game needs to be a force to be reckoned with this year if they are wanting to succeed at all. Okay. Now, what do we predict for the Cowboys in 2025? The Cowboys' 7.5 win total is on par with teams like the Falcons, the Jags, and the Colts. The freaking Patriots, 8.5, are thought of higher than Jerry Jones' squad entering 2025. Now, while I'm not mistaking Prescott and company for real contenders, because I'm not. They're not contenders. There's still enough blue chip talent on both sides of the football for me to believe that they can at least win 8 games. So give me the over on the 7.5. But my bold fantasy specific prediction for the Cowboys is that George Pickens, will catch double-digit touchdowns and earn himself a lot of money in Dallas ahead of next season, which will be interesting because I think that's going to be Micah Parsons' money. So, guys, that is the coverage of the NFC East. Next week, on Tuesday, we are going to be covering the AFC East. We are going to be covering the Bills, the Dolphins, the Jets, and the New England Patriots as the overall outlook in fantasy. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode this week. Again, I told you it was going to be a lengthy one. I appreciate everybody sticking it out. That is the NFC East as an entire whole in the fantasy outlook. So again, I hope you guys appreciate that. I hope you guys are looking forward to each division, and maybe we can talk about your team. If you guys have any suggestions or any comments, do not be afraid to comment at all. We will go over them, and we will at the end of the video. Speaking of, that's where I said we're glad that we kept Dallas Goedert. Absolutely. Absolutely. Bobby said, I believe in Ringo. He's lining up against AJ and Smitty. Absolutely. When you are lining up against arguably 2 top 15 wide receivers in the league, it helps bolster your talent, right? If you're fighting for a roster spot and you're lining up against AJ Brown every down, I can agree with that. Okay. Bobby also thinks that New York Giants coach will be fired by week 8. Bobby, I can see where that is a potential thing. I think that it depends on how their defense performs, right? I think their defense, again, let alone can win 3 or 4 games on the year. Their win total is only 5.5 in Vegas. I would be surprised if they won 8 games, but I could see them winning 6 or 7 for sure, especially with that defense. Russell Wilson's only got to win a few games, and he can do it with Malik Neighbors and Tyrone Tracy. But I do think that's a very high possibility. Brian Dable, I think, has overstayed his welcome. I think that maybe a change of scenery would be good for a Jackson Dart, a Malik Neighbors, maybe get a new young coach in there. I can agree with that. But again, I appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. We had quite the audience tonight, and I appreciate that. Again, hope everybody enjoyed. And we are going to be back Tuesday at 8 o'clock Central, again, to talk about the AFC East. See you there, guys. You have a great weekend. Happy 4th. Eat some hot dogs, enjoy some baseball, and drink some beer. That's what this weekend's for, guys. Have a good, happy 4th, and we will see you Tuesday.